Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I'm going live about now. Obviously, we now have the biggest stuff from Apple behind us for the very beginning of the year. That was the announcement of the iPhone 16e. Obviously, though, that's by far the end from the coverage. We'll get first hands-on impressions, early reviews. Then in the near-term future, we are expecting the M4 MacBook Air, maybe some kind of upgrade for the iPad Air. So plenty of Apple stuff to cover. As I've said though in the past, March is going to be a much less busy month for me. Maybe like one weekly stream, at best two if there's actually something interesting to talk about. So before we get into that kind of a hiatus, I still wanted to cover what we are getting in the world of tech, in the world of Apple, in the world of smartphones, all the things that I know interest this community. There's actually one piece specifically here of news, and that is of course Mark Gurman's weekly newsletter that came out on Sunday. Big shout out to Jimmy James UK and archive.today, who are doing a marvelous job making sure that these things are saved for prosperity and for cheapskates like me. That's neither here nor there. We'll have a lot to take from this, even though weirdly, when I originally just looked at the article, I was like, oh, you know what? This is like a basic iPhone 16e summary, a little bit of context for like what to expect. And then there's like stuff in here about like a foldable iPhone, a new iPhone design in 2026, the integration, the eventual integration of Apple's C modems into the A series chips, or even at some point the M series processors. And I'm like, all of those topics are like three giant articles. So this is kind of what Mark Gurman does, and I get respect to him for that. He like sprinkles little stuff in, and then later down the road, as these things get closer to coming to reality, he like repeats those points. He references those earlier articles and says, you know what? I had some early sources saying that. And I mean, good for him. I mean, he has been proven correct on a lot of things, especially for stuff that is very close to release. Obviously, by the time the 16e came out, we kind of knew everything. But that's not everything we're going to cover. As I mentioned, the iPhone Fold and the new iPhone design. We might speculate a little bit of what that new design might be. We'll have mention of Apple's obviously biggest competitor, and them finally building a foldable that holds up to something like the new Oppo Find N5. We have Apple's biggest Chinese competitor. I'm honestly not sure. Between like Xiaomi and Oppo and Vivo, it's honestly a little bit hard to say which of their ultra models is kind of the biggest one, because they don't break down sales by like individual model. I mean, neither does Apple. Apple doesn't even announce sales officially anymore. We kind of have to guess them based on analyst firms and stuff like that. But we do know a lot about the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. Down the road, I might talk more about something like the Nothing Phone 3A or whatever. Honestly, Nothing is such a nothing burger of a company. I have zero interest in covering them unless they actually do something that meaningfully competes in the high end. So yeah, this is why, despite all my criticism towards stuff like ColorOS and HyperOS, I do still cover companies like Oppo and Xiaomi on this channel, but less so companies like even Motorola or whatever has become of them, or Nothing, which, yeah, technically is like, they are trying some different stuff. They are trying to put the LEDs into a slightly different spot of the back of the device. But yeah, if you ever wonder why I cover certain devices, I mean, you can ask me, right? Maybe sometimes I just miss stuff like the Nothing 3A. I'm just like, I see it occasionally, but it just never gets saved in my brain. Jan joining the chat, moin moin to you as well. Which, I mean, yeah, I know it's not good morning, but it's standard German. Hello, basically. Yeah, so we have a lot to talk about. Obviously, the kind of flagship thing from Apple we are going to discuss today is that the 2026 iPhone Fold, as I still call it, or just an iPhone Foldable, which at this point we kind of are expecting to be more of this book design rather than like basically a little bit equivalent to the Galaxy Fold rather than the Galaxy Flip, which I very much appreciate. I hate the flip design, and there are some interesting tidbits that could actually get me to finally consider buying a foldable. And some will say, oh no, you're only considering now because Apple is making one. Yeah, I know people say that in Hamburg, and I'm saying it that way because I'm originally from Thüringen. I hate switching between languages. Guys, whenever you can, please try English because it does get confusing for my brain at some point, especially since I have all that stuff open simultaneously, having to track all of it. It gets a lot. Yeah, but with all of that out of the way, that early rambling, guys, do all the YouTube jazz around here. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, share that with anybody who think might enjoy it, and comment. You guys know I love interacting with a lively live chat, getting your opinions, your agreements, your disagreements. So let me know about all of that. And you can become a supporter here on YouTube. Shout out to Angelica, Max, Maximus, and Steve, who are MarkTech Pro Max supporters. You can become a supporter over on Patreon, or you can send small donations via Super Chat or Super Sticker whenever you catch me live. And if the video gets processed, which usually takes like 12 to 24 hours, you can also send what's called a super thanks, which I always forget to mention in recent months. Let's start with something smaller, and that's actually the iPhone 16 ban, or I believe it was just a flat-out ban on iPhones. Nevertheless, Indonesia is a huge market with 250 million people. Let me actually look that up exactly. Indonesia population, 280 million people, and that's by 2023. So, yikesy, that's a lot of people that Apple could have been losing out on, and now no longer. After promising to invest about $1 billion, yes, it's B with a billion, Apple is now very much back in Indonesia. I've already predicted this. I've said that 1 billion will be enough. I know some people have said, oh, Indonesia will demand that they are going to build iPhones there. The problem with that is that this would be a multi-year process. There's a huge question about like moving like actually like educated like builders on that. And while you can do that, Apple is already trying to do that in India. Doing that in China, India, and Indonesia simultaneously for iPhones is pretty much just wasted money. So while Apple can, and I believe will in the future, build more stuff in Indonesia, it will most likely be smaller stuff. AirTags, other accessories. I could even see them building stuff like cases or whatever. But this idea that they would be forced to build like iPhones actually in Indonesia, that was always a little bit unrealistic. And I guess this is also how they kind of pushed the number up, because Apple initially offered like $100 million, and obviously now they're kind of doing 10 times more. So they're doing stuff like developer academies there, manufacturing, and basically now that number is a cool $1 billion. Will be shared along several projects. We'll get the details probably in the near-term future. This is something that the Indonesian government will want to advertise. And to be honest, I am not a big fan of this kind of like government intervention in that regard. I usually prefer like higher tax rates or mandatory like worker protections, and maybe asking for a percentage of your revenue to come from local manufacturing. This kind of like, oh, give me money is always a little bit weird. I don't think that Apple should have ever been banned. But I do believe that inciting companies to actually invest in your country is very important. Sometimes I guess you have to use a little bit of force. This is $1 billion very well spent by Apple, because as we already clarified, it's a 280 million people market. It's a market that can buy iPhones, iPads, Macs, all kinds of Apple accessories. So, and of course, subscribe to subscriptions on the App Store and buy apps and games and get Apple Music Plus, get Apple TV Plus. So definitely a worthwhile investment. And on top of the $1 billion investment, Apple will commit to training locals in research and development on the company's products so they can then develop similar software and design their own goods, the people said. This is a very weirdly worded thing. Like, I don't think this is Apple just giving all their know-how to Indonesia, but I assume this is basically Apple also like working on stuff like their APIs and stuff like that. So, and even find my network shit if maybe somebody wants to build an accessory that integrates with it down the road. I honestly don't think that will be very successful. I think that the overall like $1 billion investment is much more important. But yeah, having R&D facilities, maybe having even like an Apple R&D facility, that's very good. And if Apple can also get some of their partners to invest in Indonesia, that's obviously pretty good. So again, whether or not it means that Apple is now fully in good terms with Indonesia or there will be further bickering in the future, at least I wanted to let you know that this happened. I know this has been an issue, but I didn't mention it too much in the past. I believe I mentioned it in the very beginning when it happened. I know we have people from Indonesia watching this broadcast, I guess. So if you were somebody who was worried that like, oh, in the future years I won't have iPhones like officially coming to my country, I don't think that is a worry that you'll need to have. Now, whether or not you will have to have that worry again at some point, if maybe Apple doesn't fully adhere to the deal, or maybe there was some misunderstanding in the deal, that remains to be seen, but I'm pretty optimistic. Usually Apple knows how to get into the good graces of companies. We've seen that with India, where India is now like lowering certain import rates for like foreign technology so that Apple can more easily invest in India, both as a research and development site, but also as a production site. They've been working on improving worker conditions there after like Foxconn tried building factories and really didn't have the best working conditions in India, which unironically is something that China suffered from like 30-40 years ago, but then figured it all out. And part of that was legitimately like higher paid work, better factories. And I guess when Foxconn initially came to India, they thought, oh, you know what, we can maybe save a lot of money, underpay people, give them terrible working conditions, right? But now India is also fixing all of that. And if down the road Indonesia, is probably on a path to have like 300 million plus people and might overtake like the United States in that regard, if they will ask for at least like a decent amount of production to happen in their country, I'm not sure if Apple will be able to say no, especially if we have a growing middle class there, which has been happening across the entirety of Asia. So pretty cool stuff. However you want to see it. Not necessarily the biggest fan of how this played out like from the beginning, but the end is something I can very much live with, and it's something that will down the road benefit Apple, because obviously any amount of money lost here will be dwarfed by the money gained by getting access to the Indonesian market, and Indonesia will get a little bit more investment in it than some initially planned. So that's great. So this is probably the smallest piece of news I'm covering today. In the world of Apple competition, I would like to say that the Xiaomi 15 Ultra has been shown off, or it's gonna launch in 2 days in China. This has actually been very understated, the way this all has been played out. Like, I guess part of that came down to the fact that we had already known a lot of the specifications going in. We also know that the biggest focus of the Xiaomi 15 Ultra is the camera. So this is getting all the details here is definitely the most interesting thing. So first and foremost is Now we could be talking a lot about the 1-inch sensor, but don't forget they've been doing like 1-inch sensors for like 3 to 4 years at this point. So the biggest change is the use of a 200 megapixel telephoto camera. This is going to integrate Samsung's ISOCELL HP9 sensor. This is the same one as is used in the Vivo X200 Pro. It's 1 by 1.4 inches in diagonal. Very, very clear zoom. They are advertising up to 200 millimeters. So that would be like what, 8x? And even up to 400. Now, granted, the optical zoom by itself is not that huge, but if you do like pixel binning, like you can go down to 50 megapixel, and that's another 2x. You can go down to 12 megapixel, and that's another 2x, right? So that's kind of the main pitch here. And knowing obviously that Apple uses like a 1 by 3 inch sensor, now Apple does use like better optical image stabilization in their zoom camera, and they do have a far further away zoom at 5x natively, but that's still not going to be enough in most cases to overcome the benefits of this far, far bigger sensor. One point that Xiaomi is advertising here is also ultra low reflection glass, 24 layers of it. So a unique coating that reduces reflectivity to only 1.5%. That should reduce like lens flares and issues like that. Something that Apple has been struggling with more than most companies over the years. So this could probably be specifically like a jab at Apple. And this is something I very, very much appreciate because whenever people like try to advertise like features like, oh, we have more memory or even we have more storage, I'm like, yeah, you can put in more RAM and more storage in any phone. It's not really the biggest breakthrough. But when you legitimately have different things that solve like long-standing issues potentially, that is something I very, very much support. The glass is positioned over the entire camera island, so this huge circle, it's not just aesthetic glass, it is also like the outermost part of every camera system, which, for example, if you look at the iPhone, that's not the case. Every individual camera is a camera bump over Apple's camera island, while this here, the most outer piece, and I actually would say this looks pretty good because this makes all of it smooth, right? For Apple, their overall bump is not one huge circle, so it's okay that the individual cameras protrude a little bit on top of that. But for a system where you have already such a huge circle on your device, and I honestly wonder, how do you make that work with stuff like magnetic charging and shit like that? Like even just regular wireless charging, you probably would need to put the charging coil like definitely not right in the middle of the product, but down there. So I mean, you don't really have to do it the same way Apple does it, but it's still like So, but at least this huge camera bump is not entirely featureless. So it's about a 4x optical zoom that telephoto camera, that periscope camera. So that's actually quite cool. We've seen some systems that are more in the 3x range recently advertise themselves as like periscope cameras and shit like that. So I'm very happy that this actually does have a nice optical zoom. And then of course, thanks to its 200 megapixels, thanks to its huge sensor, you'll be able to get quite a nice amount of digital zoom on top of that. They're also saying it will have good resistance against scratches, which, yeah, probably is necessary if you have so many cameras so close together. If this phone falls down, it's very likely you will scratch one of the cameras. So having very hard glass there to prevent that is very good. The main sensor here is a 1-inch sensor from Sony. That is nothing new. Again, 1-inch sensors, they're cool. They let in obviously a lot of light. they do have some issues with when you put them into like a smartphone form factor. There is a reason why even like Vivo is not going for a 1-inch sensor again on the upcoming Vivo X200 Ultra. They're keeping the same 1 by 1.28 inch sensor as they have in the Pro and as Apple has on the iPhones Pro and Pro Max. So very interesting, like nothing substantial here. One thing that I'm actually not sure about is, do we have a confirmation of the capacity of the battery? Because that was one thing that I was really not liking in the earliest rumors, that it would have basically a smaller battery, which I guess makes sense considering the crazy amount of cameras here. So for one, there are a couple of things though that I really don't understand here. You have a 3x telephoto with like a relatively small sensor, right? And OIS, it's 3.2x zoom, but like really? And then you have 4.3x. You have such a good 1-inch sensor. Why are you wasting money and internal space on this 3x telephoto? I'm really like, especially if you already have to give up battery life at all, like having extra cameras here just rubs me the wrong way. And the other thing is that you have an ultra wide with a sensor size that now actually is undercut by something like Samsung or even Apple. And yeah, you have like a nice f1.8 oh my god, my brain just farted and completely aperture. So you let in a decent amount of light, similar to what Samsung is doing. But like really, with all the like my suggestion would have been just take out this 50 megapixel 3.2x telephoto, focus. You could even make this a little bit less zoomy. Just make this a nice 4x telephoto, right? At that point, any difference between 3 and 4x is just the difference between like moving a few steps back and forth. It's really not a big deal. You could have even used like a slightly less optic zoom to maybe work on the aperture, maybe do this like f2.4, something like that. And then you could have used the extra space for an actually meaningfully better ultra wide, and also like you have like this terrible front facing sensor still for so many years. And I know technically it's like larger than what Apple is implementing, but come on, like you just don't have the image pipeline that Apple has to deal with like a smaller than 1 by 3 inch sensor. Like this is so 5500 milliampere hours. Okay, so I guess it's not 54. It's 120 watts wired, it's 80 watt wireless, it's 10 watts reverse wireless. So kudos to the very fast charging speeds. The reduction battery capacity is not as bad as I had feared. It also does have features like satellite communication, which unfortunately is not standard across the entire range. But that being said, battery, I wish we got like one camera less, but still the full 6000 milliampere hours, right? Like the Xiaomi 15 Pro, when you look at it, right, 6100 mil. So we have like basically a 10% reduction. I don't know if it was supposed to be 5400, or maybe I just imagined it and the rumors were always saying 5500, but this is definitely not like, I dislike it when there are any downgrades on ultra devices. And honestly, I don't see why you would compromise it that same way, right? Now, obviously, a real-world test will show if the display is any better and stuff like that, because these devices thus far have not exactly wowed me with everything about them. Like, I do think that Xiaomi, for example, doesn't deliver necessarily the best, like, well, they do give you decent sustained performance on the Qualcomm chips, but they don't really do a great job of giving you like really high peaks in performance, so they usually end up underperforming a little bit, even if it's like by 5% or something like that. And these are things that this is where I would want the Ultra to go all out. I don't want the Ultra to have less battery, and I don't know if the cooling is any better. Plus, I've seen previous Ultra models to sometimes have terrible speaker quality because they basically sacrifice the internal space to fit in extra cameras, larger cameras. So I'm not the biggest fan of the approach. Honestly, of all the Ultras right now, like probably the Vivo X200 Ultra, did they not have it as a separate model here? Is probably going to be the most interesting one, or is it just Vivo? Wait, is it Pro Ultra? No, that's no. But there's the Pro Mini. Wait, where is the Vivo X200 Ultra? Switch it to English. Yeah, like notebook check. Each tip to come in 3 colors. Okay, that's not really a big thing. Launch with Apple style action button. Yeah, like with better battery and charging specs than X200. Well, that's the X200S. So you see, the lineups are really getting a little bit messy at this point, though. The video is getting more exciting. Not only is the main camera expected to offer 3 cameras of roughly the same size and the native 35mm focal length, but also 4K 120 video recording. So that's not bad. So here, the main sensor is a 1 by 1.3 inch sensor. That's roughly the same what Apple is using on the iPhone 16 Pros. We have that 200 megapixel telephoto. And the ultra wide is supposedly also pretty big. So that's one thing where it noticeably deviates from what we get with the Xiaomi, where we get like that huge main sensor and this 1.4 inch by 1.4 inch 200 megapixel telephoto, but we still get like pretty underwhelming ultra wide specs, for example. Yeah, but we'll have to see how it all plays out. Again, Apple is having more competition, especially in China and in regions where devices like these are sold. So that's unfortunately not the United States, but I still want to cover them. And I know a lot of people watching this are from India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Indonesia. So I know you guys get access to those devices. So I still want to cover them. They're not my priority, even if some of them are available in Europe. Some of them are actually downgraded here, but that's another discussion for another day. So I just wanted to show, yeah, I'm keeping track of the competition, gonna look up the reviews once they come out. Really interested in seeing if there are any notable compromises inside the device, except for the already confirmed lower battery capacity. Like, is cooling potentially worse? How does the display perform? All that stuff. So we can clean up a little bit here, and now we can actually get to the really big stuff. It's all kind of one giant topic. It's about a new foldable iPhone. We can call it iPhone Fold or however you want to call it. This comes primarily from Bloomberg's Mark Gurman. If you go to his newsletter, you will find a summary of the iPhone 16e, which of course makes sense. He also talks about Apple's C1 modem and how it improves battery life, gives Apple a path forward to reduce their reliance on Qualcomm parts, how they're giving up the $400, $420, $450 price market. So for example, like the next or all Google Pixel A's, like they are in the $400 to $500 range. So this is something that Apple is definitely not competing directly with the iPhone 16e, especially since a lot of devices in that price range also have like dual camera systems, some kind of higher refresh rate, and those are features that Apple is notably missing. Now, of course, we can argue how important those features are. I would argue that most people buying phones under $600 and definitely under $500 probably care more about something like battery life and just overall device snappiness, something that at least according to the spec sheet, Apple is providing in spades with the A18 chip and the battery life thanks to the improvements of the C1 modem. Whether or not people want 90 or even 120 hertz refresh rate on those devices, I'm sure they don't hate the option to get it, but I'm just saying I'm not sure if it's a deal breaker. Now, dual cameras for markets like India, I know those markets are very sensitive to like individual spec points. This is why you see products like the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. They would rather have like some mediocre extra cameras bolted on top, like what we discussed with the ultra wide and that with the 3x telephoto, rather than like use that space for anything else. It's because probably people care more about seeing, oh, it has 4 cameras, than they actually care about exactly what kinds of those cameras are. But again, we'll see how the 16E performs. With that, it's also very important to note that while it has a $600 MSRP, making it $120 more expensive than the 120 gigabytes iPhone SE was before it, there is obviously like inflation happened, big OLED display, switch to full screen, better 48 megapixel versus 12 megapixel, much better battery life. I assume stuff like improvements to speakers, microphones, haptics, just from the bigger size, IP68 versus IP67. So maybe Apple has to rely on something like carrier discounts for the first year of the iPhone E, right? And then maybe the iPhone 17e introduces an extra camera to the Fold or something like that, right? Don't forget, for example, when the iPhone XR came out, it cost $750 and came with 1 camera. And then 1 year later, the iPhone 11 had a dual camera system and notable improvements to battery life and actually cost $50 less. So people might predict like the end of an entire product line based on the first generation and without considering how you can play around with the price. Devices are not sold at MSRP forever. Devices are upgraded and changed, and Apple can even choose to keep the 16E a year down the line for like $450, $480 in the lineup, at which point even a year later, honestly, thanks to the A18, it will be very competitive. And if Apple then has a $550 or even a full $600 iPhone 17e that has an A19 chip, that has a dual camera system, maybe even brings back a feature like MagSafe, that is honestly all Apple would need to do. And that is why they sometimes try to pull off the bare minimum, because they know, oh, if customers don't react too well to it, well, too bad. Then instead of the $599 16E, most of them will buy the $799 16. And oh, those who don't want the 16, they might be convinced to get the 16 Pro. Or you really want a promotion at a cheaper price? Well, guess what? The 17 in a couple of months will bring an A19 chip and promotion to the $800 price point. So plenty of small things that Apple can do to make the 16E very successful, or honestly push other devices more into prominence, right? The 16E makes the 16 look kind of good, which I know the 16 has never looked too bad, but the lack of something like promotion made people often say, you know what, for $200 more you get the Pro. But what about people who never were able to afford a $1,000 phone and were like always like searching for something in the $600-700 price range? Well, now the $600 16E might not be good enough, but maybe if they squint enough and they're like, you know what, the 16 is $800, maybe now with some discounts and stuff like that, I can get it closer for $700. and it will feel like a good deal, right? So again, you can look all of that up in the analysis by Mark Gurman. We have also discussed what other features Apple is going to launch or what devices Apple is going to launch in the near-term future, like the M4 MacBook Air that is still rumored for some point in March. So hopefully I'll be able to cover that when it comes out. iOS 18.4 betas have come out last Friday, and we got yesterday our first public betas. Hopefully we'll get like new developer betas, because like the entire iPhone 12 generation got like the betas pulled from them. So there seems to have been some bugs or some issues there. So install it right now at your own peril. Probably always best to wait at least until the public version, and better even to then wait for like a second or third beta. I have it installed. I'm now using Apple Intelligence in Europe. I'm actually enjoying Genmoji and Image Playground way more than I even did on my Mac, because the Mac has never been excluded from getting Apple Intelligence in Europe. So I've been sending a ton of Genmoji to friends and family members. They've been loving them. In my opinion, it's the best AI feature currently out there that I would use very regularly. Cleanup is cool. Cleanup works about as well for simple objects for me as does the Magic Eraser in the Google Photos app. Though, of course, Magic Eraser works way better on more complicated objects and objects that cover a bigger portion of the screen. So, yeah, it's great now to have both options, and both of them run offline, and both of them are really, really fast. So this is where you as an Apple user really aren't losing out, because even when Apple lags behind Google or Samsung on certain features, you can always bet that the likes of Google will bring those features to Apple through the App Store, through their own apps, through the browser. So yeah, to me, it's all been fine. Obviously, visionOS is also now being confirmed to get Apple Intelligence in April, and visionOS 2.4 beta is now out. Really, really cool. I know some people who really use like Vision Pro like religiously, like they spend their entire workday in it. And the fact that Apple has not forgotten it when it comes to Apple Intelligence is definitely a good sign. To me, it's honestly not surprising. I think that fact that people thought, oh, Apple is giving up on the first generation of Vision Pro or something like that, that to me was always a little weird. I mean, even if they weren't able to bring Apple Intelligence for whatever reason to the first generation Vision Pro, I don't think that would have meant they are forgetting that Vision Pro. But I also think that it was always unlikely that they would never bring Apple Intelligence to an M2 device that has 16 gigabytes of system memory. That's not even to mention that it has DR1 chip to separately deal with all the video inputs, the sensor inputs from the 3D sensors and stuff like that. So if you are a fan of Vision Pro, now whether or not that means you actually buy one at $3,500, I think this is a good time for you. With that, Apple also released macOS 15.4, iPadOS 18.4, a bunch of other betas, so feel free to try out. But as always, maybe wait a little bit. Now, next thing is actually something that is probably a big thing for the future, but it's not something that is going to come true in the very near-term future. But this is something that a lot of us who have been following Apple's A-series chips, Apple Silicon chips, M-series processors, all that jazz. This is kind of what we have suspected would be the ultimate outcome of Apple building their own Wi-Fi and 5G modems. Obviously, C1 is their 5G modem. There are rumors that Apple is going to build Wi-Fi modems for the iPhone 17 family. Then next year, we're getting C2 with notable improvements. And by C3, Apple expects to be competitive with Qualcomm's high-end chips, so they will probably integrate millimeter wave in it. or not. It depends on how the market develops. Maybe even Verizon stops caring at that point. But they will bring in much better multi-carrier aggregation, stuff like that, improve peak download and upload speed. So plenty of stuff that Apple can do here. By the way, just checking, 0 frame drop. So I'm very happy with that. But yeah, this is something that Mark Gurman comments on. He says that Apple will eventually integrate their modems into the main processors, but that will take time. So he explains like that rollout of the C2, the C3, and that by 2028 they will have a very high-end solution. Whether or not that means they integrate it right away into their A-series processors or not, that remains to be seen. But probably by like 2030, Apple will want to integrate them. The benefits you get from it, obviously you get to put it on the latest node. Now you could do the same thing with the C1 or the C2, but it's honestly much smarter if it is a separate chip, because there's a lot of stuff on it that just doesn't scale too well. You just put it honestly on a slightly older node. You don't lose too much in efficiency, but you save a lot of money, right? And the separate chip obviously gives you the benefit. You can integrate it in the iPhone, the iPad, the Mac. If you put it directly on the die, unless you make it a multi-die solution, which Apple has not yet done chiplets beyond the M Ultra chips, but we'll see. Maybe that would be a solution for Apple. Like at that point, they could have, instead of a fully separate modem die, they could have a modem chiplet, and that could still integrate with the A-series chips, the MacBook M-series processors. But if they put it directly on the die and they put it on the same node as the A-series chips, that reduces latency. There's very little communication penalty. Apple can probably get away with not putting any extra cores for the modem. Like usually a modem has like its own, you can kind of call them e-cores, basically very low power, low performance cores that handle the workload. So Apple could in that case maybe just put in 2 extra e-cores that could be used for the iPhone as well as for the modem stuff. In that case, they kind of benefit everything that's happening on there. And of course, it's just better for Apple, right? They can go to TSMC and say, you know what, the A-series chip now grows from like 110 square millimeters to 150. Probably not as much, but maybe 130, 140. So we are still ordering the same amount, but we would like to pay a little bit less, like per square millimeter, because you guys know you'll get now like 25% more die space bought from us. So, but we don't want to pay you 25% more money. How about we pay you 15 to 20% more money, right? That's usually how this goes. This is how you get like discounts for mass orders. So that will be interesting, but this is something for 2028. We'll talk a lot about that in the future to come. The AI pin is dead, has been bought by HP. Don't give a flying fart. Apple promised to invest $500 billion in the United States to appease Trump a little bit. Don't care about that. Let's talk about the thing that is actually really interesting, and it's honestly it's such a small part of the article. It just baffles me the way it is presented, and that has to do with Jesus. Where is it? Command F, foldable. Wait, what? And another. Oh, okay. Yeah, I kind of missed that. Those were just 2 separate sentences. Jan saying, when do you think the embargo lifts and we'll get the first reviews of the 16E? It's either tomorrow or on Thursday. There's literally no other option. I mean, I can look into it, right? I actually already search for the 16E. I kind of thought we would get unboxings today. So my speculation at that point would be we're getting unboxings tomorrow. and then we're getting reviews on Thursday. I mean, I can look up iJustine. She usually unboxes everything. Nope. So yeah, that is my speculation on this. So let's get into the really hot stuff. The iPhone Foldable, which you can see, it's not like there's a lot to cover here by Mark Gurman, but we'll have other rumors and even some of competitive stuff that we can all integrate and get a better understanding of what to expect. First is we are supposedly getting an iPhone Foldable next year. Now this foldable is very, very likely that iPhone Fold, so similar to what the Galaxy Z Fold is. We know that Apple either gave up on a flip-like design or they pushed it away. And there's also supposedly a Mac iPad hybrid, basically an iPad that folds out into essentially a MacBook, but without the keyboard, which would probably mean it gets some kind of keyboard accessory for that. But this, what we are talking about today, is the iPhone Foldable, right? So this is not the iPad Mac hybrid, and this is not a flip-like device. And interestingly enough, according to Mark Gurman, there's also another new iPhone design in the works for that year, I'm told. Now, he's like, the way he's wording it, new iPhone design, it does not mean that we'll have a new design for iPhones, but it kind of suggests that we're getting a new type of iPhone model. And my only speculation that makes even the smallest amount of sense is that if we are getting the iPhone 17 Air this year, but we're getting is like a 6.6-inch device, then my speculation is that maybe by the iPhone 18 series, we'll get two iPhone Airs, a 6.1-inch model and the 6.6-inch model. Maybe Apple at that point has a lot more supply for stuff like silicon carbon batteries and vapor chamber heat sinks, and found whatever compromise they need to make the Air a very attractive product, and maybe they make it a little bit thicker so it's not as problematic as I predict it might be. But that's kind of where I'm like at a loss for words, because, the iPhone 16 is the only one kind of not being design changed this year. So obviously the SE gets updated to the 16E. The 16 Plus becomes the 17 Air, and both the 16 Pro and the 16 Pro Max get a noticeable redesign on the 17 Pro series. And the 16 to the 17 will keep the same vertical dual camera layout. It will get ProMotion, but again, it's no new design stuff. It's not noticeably thinner. It doesn't have the elongated camera bar on the back. Probably will stay a glass aluminum hybrid, so no weird tricks like what Apple is pushing with the 17 Pro series. So that is kind of my speculation, that if there is actually a new iPhone design in 2026, this is basically going to be the regular iPhone 18 turning more into something like an iPhone 18 Air. Whether or not that means Apple removes one camera from it, for example, as they are likely to be doing with the 17 Air versus the 16 Plus, or maybe they're actually improving the 18 Air by giving it dual cameras, and that way they have a much cleaner lineup. One thing that I really like about the current lineup is that there's a lot of logical scaling from the 16 to the 16 to the 16 Pro. And if they do this weird thing where the 17 Air, where the 18 family, like the 18 Air and the 18 Air Plus or whatever, both come with single camera solutions, honestly, I'm not sure that would be received too well. So that could be a compromise that I could see happen. Like Apple makes the 18 thinner than the 17, gives it the elongated camera bar, but also gives it dual cameras rather than the single camera solution on the 17 Air. Now, that's the new design, which usually even a sentence like this would kind of get us excited almost for an entire video to talk about. But let's actually talk about the device that now seems to be much closer in our grasp than we have predicted, and that is 2026. Now again, this could all be subject to internal delays, or Mark Gurman could have gotten some stuff wrong. Maybe the entire internal timeline is actually like, oh, at the earliest we can make it in 2026, and more likely it's a 2027 or even 2028 product. But Mark Gurman just only heard like the first part of it. But if it is actually coming in late 2026, that's quite crazy. So what do we know about that 2026 foldable? And this is actually rumor stuff that has been popping out just in the recent days, and in fact today. So this iPhone, now this is according to Korean publication ET News, so they aren't always perfect, but they have gotten some tech news and some Apple news right in the past. They are actually working on an iPhone foldable, in this case this book-like foldable, and we've covered that it would have like a 5.8 inch external screen and stuff like that, but that's not as important as that its main attraction, that a big internal screen, is supposedly not going to have a crease. Apple has decided to eliminate the crease at all costs, regardless of price, which to me suggests this is going to be a rather expensive product, to differentiate its foldable from existing models. And this is in fact one thing that could finally get me to buy a foldable. Now I would still want to know that it's durable, so I would want for Apple to replicate at least something like IP67 on it. Like, I don't drop my phone in the pool, so IP68 is not an absolute necessity. But like the current state of foldable durability is at least a little bit questionable to me. But this, if it actually like completely or like 90% takes away the crease, which has been my biggest complaint with foldables, and if it actually gives you like a nice regular iPhone screen on the outside, and then basically an iPad mini screen on the inside, probably, hopefully with Apple Pencil compatibility, that could be a killer product. Samsung displays, supposedly the OLED supplier here. Not surprising, everything from the actual foldable stuff to the ultra thin glass, which I'm very thinking likely that Apple is going to be working with Corning to improve this on, but Samsung has been first to be pushing like new materials that give you like a glass-like feel and more of a protection than standard plastic. I'm pretty sure Apple will push that even further, which will probably make it even more expensive. And for the hinge itself, Apple is supposedly working with US-based Amphenol, which currently does manufacture MacBook Pro hinges, which are pretty good. I'm pretty sure Apple will go pretty crazy with that hinge to make it really, really robust, so they don't end up with issues like even something like the OnePlus Open, which yes, is a good product and doesn't break as easily as some people make it out to be. But after all the crazy fuss about like its titanium hinge and stuff like that, the fact that it got any kind of negative coverage about its durability later on really hurts all that marketing, and this is something that Apple will want to avoid here. So supposedly 5.5 inch outer display. This could be like, we've some people have said that it would have unprecedented aspect ratios. Now 5.5 inches, Apple has made 5.5 inch displays in the past. Those were 16:9 aspect ratio screens that then resulted in like a 1080p display, right? Nicely, almost like a regular TV. And then a 7.74 inch inner screen, which would make it a little bit smaller than the iPad mini, but hopefully with an aspect ratio wider than a lot of the almost squared aspect ratio we are currently getting on foldables. It could actually be more usable than some devices that have more like 8 inch screens, for example. Yeah, but how does this compare to what we're getting from the competition? Well, Samsung is supposedly finally waking up with their Galaxy Z Fold series. We are getting a noticeable improvement next year with the Galaxy Z Fold 7. We are having a couple of early renders for it. Now, I still don't like this camera design, but it will be catching up mostly to something like the new Oppo Find N5, which I've covered in one of my previous videos, that is under 9 millimeters thick overall. This will not be quite that thin. It will be 9 to 9.5 millimeters thick when closed up and 4.5 millimeters thick when unfolded. Unfortunately, though, the Oppo Find N5 comes with a very slim form factor and still a very, very large 5600 milliamp hour battery. Samsung is supposedly keeping the same 4400 milliamp hour battery on their Z Fold. Now, will Apple give us a truly large battery? I'm not sure. But if there's one device where I see Apple integrating something like silicon carbide battery technology, I see that definitely happening on the iPhone Fold. Because in comparison to the iPhone Airs, which yes, do prioritize thinness, but they do not prioritize the most high-end kind of experience, right? In comparison to that, if Apple charges like $2,500 for an iPhone Fold, they better make sure it has like the all-day battery life when unfolded that you kind of would expect something like an iPad mini to have, while still having all the niceties of an iPhone, like a good camera, a MagSafe, all that stuff, good speakers, OLED screens, high refresh rates, and at that point you would need actually a battery that is larger than the one on the iPad mini. So having something in the 5000 milliamp hour range would probably be enough, given that Apple's components are in general more energy efficient than something that like Oppo would utilize. But Samsung having a battery for an 8.2-inch display, and the battery that is smaller than the one on the 15 Pro Max, much less the 16 Pro Max, much less the Galaxy S24 and 25 Ultra, much less than the latest Vivo X200 Ultras and Pros and the Xiaomi 15 Ultras and Pros. That to me is very, very disappointing. Now it would be using like most likely the next generation, Oh yeah, right. It would still be the Snapdragon 8 Elite chip, right? Because it will be coming in 2025. So by that point, yeah, we would be the competitor to actually the iPhone Fold would then be more like a Galaxy Z Fold 8. And we are getting rumors that the S26 series are going to integrate much better batteries. So maybe by the time Apple launches the iPhone Fold, quote unquote, again, not confirmed in any way, that name, maybe the Galaxy Z Fold 8 will actually be competitive in terms of stuff like battery capacity. Then it would have something like the Snapdragon 8 Elite 2. But for now, even with all those changes, I'm still looking at the foldable market. That just doesn't get me over the edge to consider it. And by the way, I am not against having a secondary device. This is what a lot of people don't understand. Some people think like, oh, you wouldn't be switching anyway, right? Yeah, but I don't have to switch, especially with a foldable. I would just keep something like the Galaxy Z Fold. It's like a nice secondary device. And I would even pay top dollar for it if it just didn't come with compromises. Especially for a product that is noticeably thicker than a lot of the competition right now, to not have the S Pen built in is just really, really weird in my opinion. To not have the highest end cameras, even if they technically would be like a little bit worse than the Ultra in some ways, but just have this notable multi-generational gap almost. And yeah, next year, finally 8.2-inch screen, finally a little thinner, or even noticeably thinner, but then also a noticeably worse battery. That is just like, ugh. So if next year Apple brings out an iPhone Fold without a crease, but that makes it very expensive, right? And Samsung then simultaneously launches a Fold that finally has a decent battery inside and maybe focuses on some unique Samsung attributes like the S Pen. That to me would be an actually competitive and an actually interesting foldable landscape. Yeah, but that's about it for today. There's nothing too crazy. Obviously, knowing that we're getting two like new iPhone models that are kind of new for the entire lineup, or whether or not they even changed the design drastically for one model, and then we get the Fold as the absolute flagship. That sounds really cool. Beyond that, there's plenty of other rumors like or just new stuff to consider. So Apple's Face ID doorbell is rumored to be getting MagSafe. This is not coming from a very good source. So, and again, like I guess, like I mean, Apple could have like a wall wireless charger, right, with some NFC built in, and then you put in the doorbell on that or something like that. I'm not sure. I don't care. I will cover it when it's coming from more reputable sources. One interesting thing, and one thing that once again kind of underscores just how much better the Apple ecosystem is when it comes to getting the latest and greatest apps. Adobe Photoshop is actually not just coming to iPhone, but it has come out on iPhone. So this is a more feature-rich version than something like Photoshop Express that has been on mobile for a few years. It costs $8 per month or $70 per year. So consider if that's worth it for you. It will come to Android, so it's not exclusive to iPhone, but it is coming to Android by the end of the year. So you can see once again how like the fragmentation definitely impacts the Android market. LumaFusion is also getting some nice updates. So if you are like a LumaFusion user, consider that. But beyond that, seems like we're kind of done with all the latest leaks and rumors we're getting. Apple investors reject proposal to end DEI program. Yeah, should have never ended. And we see that all the companies doing this are just losers who are trying to suck up to Trump. And Apple is also sucking up to Trump. Like they gave $1 million to its inauguration campaign and stuff like that. And Apple is now promising to invest a ton of money in the US, which most of that money was going to be invested anyway, by the way. Like Apple building like a private cloud compute server system in Houston is not revolutionary news. Apple has promised us to bring private cloud compute and more server infrastructure like as part of Apple Intelligence anyway. There's also stuff about that private cloud compute infrastructure, like Apple supposedly is going to build it on top of M5 chips, which really puts into question like why even make M4 Ultra, Mac Pros, and Mac Studios at that point if you're really going all out with M5? Because at that point it will be built on the last generation 3nm node by TSMC, N3P. At that point, just rush out the M5, give us the M5, maybe give us even the M5 Max, the M5 Ultra first. Give us the Mac Pro and the Mac Studio first, and then later on you can still introduce us to a new MacBook Pro, to a new MacBook Air. I know that's not how Apple's internal development works, but I'm really, really disappointed that we are still stuck with M2 Ultra if you want an Apple high-end desktop. Yes, you can get an M4 Pro Mac Mini, but that's mind-boggling that I have to consider an M4 Pro if I want to get the best from Apple in a desktop, and I have to get in like the smallest space. Like, just at least give me an M4 Max Mac Studio, right? That one is faster than the M2 Ultra in almost every way. If you clock it a little bit higher because of the big thermal envelope of the Mac Studio, but yeah, that's a rant for another day. So thank you guys for joining. I'll try keeping you updated with smaller videos like that, about an hour. I know that my release schedule is a bit irregular, and I actually do have some longer weekend plans, so the last stream I'll be able to do this week is on Thursday. So actually I have had some nice weekends overall, so I apologize for that, a little bit messing up my schedule. However, I hope that by Thursday I'll be able to do a nice long video for the iPhone 16e reviews, and if there's still something interesting going on, I might do a small stream on Saturday or something like that. But that will depend on how all my plans ultimately pan out. So thank you guys so much for watching. Last shout out to all the YouTube jazz, to do all the YouTube jazz again. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, share it out with anybody who you think might enjoy it. Comment, don't just comment live, also comment in the chat afterwards. And beyond all that, you can become a channel member right here on YouTube. You can support this channel whenever you catch me live with super chats, super stickers. You can also become a supporter over on Patreon. All support, just watching and liking these videos is very much appreciated. And as always, let me know what you would like to see me cover next. Thank you so much. This is Mark Tech, tuning out.